Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door is one of the most beloved Mario games ever made. It also happens to be one of my favorite games of all time. The moment I popped it into my GameCube for the very first time and watched that opening cinematic, I was hooked. From the characters to the visuals and of course the gameplay, there isn't anything about this game I do not love. Even the backtracking doesn't really get to me. So of course, when Nintendo announced the remake to one of the most legendary Mario games out there, I instantly pre-ordered myself a copy. And I have just recently completed my playthrough of it, and I have to say that this remake is fantastic. It is so close to being nearly perfect. The biggest thing that stands out in this remake is the most obvious, which is the visuals. This game is downright gorgeous. The graphics, the textures, the characters, and even the lighting. This game was a real glow up from the original. I especially love what they did for the characters, where instead of bringing back that white outline that everyone hated, to try and make them stand out from the background more, they instead opted to give the characters themselves more depth by making them look a little thicker. So instead of just trying to keep the old style of everyone looking paper thin, they tried to go for more of a cardboardy look. It allows for each body part to stand out a bit more since they aren't fully connected and instead layered on top of one another. I feel like most fans, myself included, were a little worried that if they were to remake the older Paper Mario games that they would give the characters the white outlines again, but thankfully they decided to stay true to the original and thought of a different way to make the characters stand out from the backgrounds. And I think that they did such a good job that I really do hope that going forward, if they do make another Paper Mario game that's akin to the first two, that they stick with this art style. All of the edges of the characters are a lot smoother as well, and the textures look all around better since everything is also in a higher resolution. And an extra detail that they included was that the puddles you come across in Rogueport have some reflection in them, which I think was completely absent in the original. But of course, the visuals aren't the only thing that get updated in remakes. Naturally, the sound was completely remade as well. The smaller things like the effects of Mario jumping or using his hammer just sound better overall, but the big changes are, as you would expect, in the music and the themes. Now usually, I think remade themes are just kind of inferior to me since I am sort of a nostalgia baby, and I think that they tend to overproduce them a little bit and lose some of the soul that the originals had, but with this, I think that there are certain tracks that are just as good, if not even better than the originals. Some of the remade themes that I think are better are the battle theme, the Pit of 100 Trials theme, and of course the best theme from the best character in the entire game, don't fight me about it, the main man, Rockhawk. I mean, his original theme was already a banger, but they knew that since Rockhawk was easily the most hyped character in the entire game, that if they wanted to do his new theme justice, they would absolutely need to go balls to the wall, and that is exactly what they did. Now, believe it or not, the new looks and the new themes aren't the things I like the most about this remake. I believe the thing that they improved on the most for this remake were the animations. They just made this game so much more expressive. Like, when Mario tries to explain something, he'll bring both of his arms out in front of him to try and show that he's conveying important information. But these new animations aren't exclusively to just Mario. Your partners are also more animated, and they show it off really well when there's something important happening in the story. Some of the story NPCs ended up getting new animations as well. Like in the first chapter with Koopy-Koo, Koops' somewhat kind of not really girlfriend, she'll bring her fingers together to show that she's really worried about Koops going on an adventure. Though the character I think that shows off the new animations the best is Prince Mush after you rescue him after defeating the chapter 3 boss. But it wasn't just the good guys that got new animations, even the generic enemies got some too. If you end up going into combat against a Goomba or a Piranha Plant and you end up getting hit by something like say a rock from the crowd, they will just straight up laugh at you. I really don't feel like they needed to go this far for just a remake, but I am so glad that they did because it only adds to an already amazing game. Now, I've talked about how the game looks, its animations, and the sound, but what about the gameplay? You know, the thing that kind of matters the most in a game? Well, since this is a remake, as I'm sure you would expect, the gameplay is nearly exactly the same. The combat side of the game is completely identical to the original because as far as I could remember, there weren't any changes to fighting the enemies. The only only thing I believe that they made a bit of a change to is when someone in the audience has something to throw at you, the camera moves so that you can easily see what item that they're holding. Or at least most of the time you can. Because there were times when a smaller character was behind another larger character, so it made it a little hard to see exactly what they were about to throw. Except when they were behind one of those giant bomb enemies. When those fat bitches were in the crowd, you had to roll the RNG wheel to see if the character that was going to throw the item was behind or in front of them, and if they were behind them, well then you ain't seeing jack. But the overworld gameplay also had some changes, but they're all pretty much just for the sake of convenience. Like whenever you need to change your partner, instead of having to go into the menu to swap them, you can now instead hold the L button and a ring will appear that allows you to quickly swap them in and out. Another convenience change is that if at any point you need a hint on what to do next, you no longer need to go to the magnificently mustached Wizard Merlon. Instead, you could just press the ZL button on your controller and Goombella will give you a hint no matter where you are or whether she's your active partner or not. But easily the best convenient change that they made is that they added a brand new room with pipes that allow you to quickly warp to the previous chapters that you have already completed. They also added a new pipe in chapter 4 since the backtracking in that chapter was easily the worst, so now you don't need to constantly run back and forth between the town and the creepy steeple. Like I said earlier, I don't really mind the backtracking so much as some other people do, but I will admit it's still a nice change and I am glad that they put it in. But I think that arguably the greatest thing that a remake could bring is additional content. While they didn't go so far as to add new enemies, they did however turn two characters into optional super bosses. Those being Prince Mush, the original champ of the Glitz Pit, and Waka, that blue mole dude that you can smack to get a very useful healing item. I won't go in depth with what they could do since I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I think it's really cool that the developers decided to give a character who was known as the original champ and one of the main characters of the story an actual fight, as well as a seemingly random animal that just happens to give you something good if you smack him, but eventually decides he's had enough of your crap and tries to run away, only for you to chase him down and smack him up more than ever before. It makes me feel like the developers really thought about what the fans would like to see with some new content, and that they decided to put in any new content at all. Now, I did mention at the start of this video that I did not think that the remake was perfect, which means, obviously, that I did have some problems with it. There were some changes that they have made that I do view as being a little annoying. Probably the biggest change you've heard of is that this game only runs at 30 FPS instead of 60 FPS like the original did. Now, personally, I don't really mind this all that much. I am mostly fine with the game running at 30 FPS so long as it means it can run consistently, which this game almost always does. I think there were only a few times where it did drop below 30 when there was a lot of things happening on screen, but it only lasted for maybe a couple of seconds, so I don't think it was that big of a deal, though I did always point it out on my stream because, admittedly, I did think it was a little silly. But I do also share the sentiment that it's just weird that this game is basically a complete upgrade in every other field except its performance. It's just a little weird that a remake of a 20-year-old game is running at lower FPS than its original that was on far weaker hardware. I know that the Switch isn't the most powerful console out there, and I am also by no means a game developer, so I really have no idea how any of this works, but I can't see how this game wasn't able to run at 60 FPS when the original did so flawlessly on 20-year-old hardware. But admittedly, once I was actually playing the game, I was able to push it out of my mind pretty easily. Though it was a little jarring to see people on Twitter posting videos comparing the FPS between the two, and it was like night and day. Of course, I would have loved to play the game at 60 FPS with it looking as great as it does, but I personally don't think it's that big of a deal, and the game is still a ton of fun to play. The only other thing that gets to me a bit is what I consider to be censorship. I was always afraid that if they did ever remake this game, that they would take out some of the things that really give this game the sense of you ain't in the Mushroom Kingdom anymore. Easily the biggest thing that I figured that they would take out is our beloved noose at the center of Rogueport. So when I saw that they were keeping it during the remake's reveal, I thought there was really nothing to be afraid of. But even though that was the most important thing to me, they still did end up changing some other things. Now, while I don't really like censorship in just about any form, I also don't really want to get too hung up on it since it really only comes out in the dialogue. Like those three Goombas that you run into at the start of the game when you first go under Rogueport, they no longer catcall Goombella. Or like with the fat toad on the train during chapter 6 no longer using the word chubby to describe himself. If I remember correctly, I think Bowser also had a dialogue change with either how he describes himself or when he describes others, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I know this sort of thing is very common when it comes to updating games to be more sensitive to the modern day and its sensibilities, but it kind of sucks for someone like me who enjoyed seeing that kind of thing. It was like the game's way of showing me as the player that this new place our heroes are in is something much rougher than what we are used to, and it really gave the game its own identity. I know we live in different times now, but if anyone would lose their mind over bad guys doing something that's considered pretty crappy like catcalling a girl or a fat toad just stating what he is, then I think those people really should just play something else. So despite the silly changing of some dialogue and it only running at half the FPS as the original, I think that this remake is exactly what I wanted it to be. The game looks better than ever, the themes are great or better than the originals, the game has been updated to make some of the more sloggy parts less so, and they kept our beloved noose. The only downsides to this remake are the censoring and the lower FPS, but those are so minor compared to all the other great changes they made that honestly, I kind of hardly even notice them. And I think this remake will be the way I choose to play this game for years to come, because this certainly isn't the last time I'm going to be playing the 1000-Year Door. So if you were on the fence about grabbing this game, allow me to climb up there with you and shove you off to the side of buying it, because it really is an amazing remake. But what do you think? Do you think the remake is as great as I think it is, or do you think it's inferior to the original? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for future content. But that's gonna be it for me, so thanks for watching, stay cool, and I hope to see you next time.